Welcome to Annapolis Mosaics. Our program spotlights people in our community who are involved in activities designed to promote good human relations. I am Michael Keller, the chair of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission and your host. The commission is a city board that seeks to promote equal opportunity and to eliminate discrimination. My guest today is the Reverend Stephen A. Tillett, the president of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. Reverend Tillett, welcome to Annapolis Mosaics.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.
Well, the Anne Arundel NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in the county, having been formed in 1944. Could you share with our viewers some highlights of its history?
The NAACP has been at the forefront of seeking justice, human rights, equality, equity for county residents, state residents, for, as you said, since the 1940s. Dealing with the school board, for instance, desegregation. Desegregation came late to Anne Arundel County. The Brown versus Board of Education case, of course, was decided in 1954, and I believe it was 1966 or 67 before schools were desegregated here in Anne Arundel County. Dealing with ballot access, that they want everyone to be able to have unimpeded access to vote, to cast a vote. And of course, we're also interested in registering people to vote. We're interested in equal access to employment, and so whether it's in public services, police, fire department, school system, et cetera, that we have been proponents for years for all citizens of Anne Arundel County to be able to have access to those positions. In fact, my mom, who is not a resident of Anne Arundel County, taught at Bates High School. Her first job after graduating from DC Teachers College from 1946 to 1952. So there's a long history, and we continue to advocate for justice and equity and equality today.
Yeah. Well, the NAACP works in a large number of areas. And what I'd like to do is to go through each one individually and just let you discuss those specific programs and activities that you're involved with as an organization. The first one is something called ACT.
Okay. That is sort of a junior Olympics of the mind and arts for our young people.
Right.
And so ACT-SO gives our young people an opportunity to compete in an Olympics, whether it's arts, academics, culinary, music, spoken word poetry, etc. And it starts off at the local level, and then there's a sort of a competition at the state level, and then those that go and represent the state at our national conventions.
Yeah. And how about in the area of criminal justice? What are you doing in that area?
My. This is a 30-minute show, right?
We'd like to hear as many details as you've got.
Right. Criminal justice. Well, let's start off at, I guess, the top of the food chain there with the circuit court.
Okay.
One of the things that we have been concerned about, and our organization has been a proponent for, is a more representative judiciary. Right now, the circuit court does not have any person of color on it at all. And I think there have only been either 2 or 3 African-American men that have served on there during its 360 plus year history, and no women of color at all. So we're a proponent for a judiciary that looks like the community that it serves. And Anne Arundel County is in excess of 25% brown, and so we expect the judiciary to be some reflection of that. Also with criminal justice, obviously we are desirous of having people who are charged with a crime. Obviously you're innocent until proven guilty, but to have the right to the best defense possible, and then for whatever sentences that are meted out to be fair and reasonable. Obviously in this time frame, I don't know if you were familiar with the book, The New Jim Crow.
I've read it.
Okay, okay, by attorney Michelle Alexander, and she, of course, highlights the history of our country in unequal justice for people of color, and which has led to over-incarceration, where the United States is the top incarcerator in the world. And so when we talk about our democracies and our freedoms, and then we lock up per capita more than anybody else in the world, that's a problem. Many of those are tied to cannabis laws, which are changing. Some states at this point, cannabis is legal. In other instances, it's heading in that direction. And yet there are people who have spent sometimes decades in prison for nonviolent offenses that weakens communities because it drains a talent pool out of the community beyond just in the cannabis area, but taking people away from their homes and their families and whatnot. So those are things that we also are concerned about.
How about economic empowerment issues?
Economic empowerment, again, dealing with equal access. And so one of the main things that we're interested in right now is economic education. So we want to help to educate members of the community as much as possible about opportunities that they have to open and build businesses, some government subsidy that might be available, Small Business Administration and the like, Economic Development Corporation, to help get them started. And so we will provide workshops and opportunities for people to learn about how to get it done and to build a successful business.
You also work at EP is very concerned about the academic achievement gap between African Americans and other students in the county.
Well, there's the academic achievement gap, and there's also a discipline gap. So we'll deal with
All
those
right,
two.
let's talk about both.
The academic achievement gap obviously is a result of some historic inequities that some communities start farther back than others, and so it takes longer to catch up. On the other hand, you have the discipline gap, where sometimes communities, especially communities of color, are disciplined at a percentage that is disproportionate to their numbers in the system. So for instance, in Anne Arundel County, brown students are about 22% of the system, and yet number about 45%, double their percentage of the system of those who receive referrals and suspensions and expulsions. So those are the kinds of inequities that we go after.
How about health disparities?
Health disparities, again, a lot of that is a matter of education. In fact, we have an annual event where our health committee does a heart health event, a heart healthy event for women, because heart disease is the #1 killer of African American women. And so we talk about healthy diet, exercise, the need for regular medical attention. Because the best medical attention is preventative rather than crisis intervention, which is one of the key reasons why access to health care is so critical for not just our county and our state, but our nation, that people need to have access to quality health care, and why this falls off the list sometimes, and I don't understand dental care, because it's all tied in together. And so we're advocating as well for people to have access to those things.
Yeah. And you also focus on the area of legal redress.
Right.
Can you describe for our viewers what you mean by that? What's the focus there?
With legal redress, we have on our website, which is www.annearundelcountynaacp.org, and we have a tab on there, a link where people can click on to file a complaint. So if someone feels as though they've been a target or victim of injustice, disparate treatment in the workplace, or if they were trying to shop in a store or something like that and receive disparate treatment, they will file a complaint. Our legal redress committee will take a look at it, and then we'll respond. We don't provide lawyers for people, but we can give them some direction as to how they might respond, whether we think they might have a good case, etc.
NAACP is also pretty involved in political action issues too.
That's correct.
Give us some details about that.
Well, number one, we help register voters, and so our political action committee makes the rounds at county high schools to register whatever high school students are eligible to be registered to vote. Anyone who will be 18 by the general election in November of any election year is eligible to be registered to vote, even if they're only 17 at the time. And then we also have a very robust political action committee active in the General Assembly. So we respond to legislation as it is proposed, and we will either craft a statement and perhaps even deliver an oral statement in favor of or in opposition to legislation that we find objectionable.
And you also work in the area of what I think we describe as youth inclusion. What kind of outreach do you have to youth?
We have a youth council in the branch. As a matter of fact, it has just been reestablished, and so what we try to do is teach young people about becoming civically active and engaged, to learn about their rights, to educating them on how to become forceful advocates for themselves, whether it's in the schools, in the community, etc. And then, of course, they have the branch, the adult branch, that can stand behind them in those efforts.
We're going to take a break now, but when we return, we'll have a further conversation with Reverend Tillett about the issues that the NAACP is focusing on. I'm talking today with the Reverend Stephen A. Tillett, who is the president of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. What issues are at the forefront of your work at this time in Anne Arundel County as it relates to the mission of the NAACP?
I would say a lot of our advocacy right now is focused, again, in the political action realm. Whenever the state legislature is in, obviously we are responding to bills that are being proposed, or sometimes we will ask for a delegate or senator to sponsor a bill. One of the key areas that has come up recently has been with respect to hate crimes. As you're aware, there was an incident at a middle school in 2017 where the hate crime statute was inadequate to deal with all of the factors involved. And so we then will approach legislators and say, okay, so when we define hate crime, we also need for it to include individuals and groups, and then also the symbolism of hate crimes, whether it's a cross or KKK regalia or a noose, swastika, anything of that nature, that the code needs to be specific enough that there's not a loophole big enough for a truck to drive through to get somebody off. Also in the area of laws regulating cannabis, at this point, some states are allowing for medical marijuana to be available for sale, and some states recreational use. In either case, as much of the brunt of enforcement, because the war on drugs has largely been seen as a war on us in brown communities. And we're saying, okay, well, now that cannabis is legal for sale, at least for medical reasons and eventually perhaps for recreational reasons, then some of the licenses that will go to folks that can grow and market and sell it should go to brown people. That seems a fair thing to do. So those are the kinds of things that we would advocate for as well. And then, of course, with respect to police, body-worn cameras, dash cams, those kinds of things, to make both police and community more accountable. Because then if there's a camera that's recording what's happening, that takes the guesswork away. You have footage. And to make the police accountable, to make sure that they operate them appropriately so that they don't suddenly get turned off in the middle of an interaction. So we are trying very much to stand again in the path of justice, fairness, equity for all of our citizens.
The Annapolis Human Relations Commission has been concerned about the issue of hate crimes and hate incidents for some time. Over years, several years ago, we, in conjunction with our county counterparts, had a well-attended workshop that was sponsored by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they walked us through all the details of how to respond to not only hate crimes, but also hate incidents. And hate incidents being those matters that fall under constitutionally protected categories.
Right.
And we've had examples of that here in Anne Arundel County. I can remember when the Ku Klux Klan had a rally at Lawyers Mall. The way that was handled was that they were basically isolated, ignored, and there was a major rally in opposition to them and what they stood for at St. Anne's Episcopal Church, just right across the circle. Mm-hmm. The thing that we've learned over the years is that the single most important thing is that you not ignore these groups. If you ignore them and think they're going to go away, that only gives them encouragement. And so that's one thing that we've worked really hard to do, is to try to tell people what to do if these groups come into your community. We did have a series of incidents several years ago in which a group called the National Alliance, which is a neo-Nazi organization, were putting vicious hate literature in bottles and throwing it on people's lawns. And again, the response there was, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do in terms of preventing it, because it's not a crime per se. It's a hate incident. But what you want to do is to get your community together to denounce it. And I think the best response I can remember was Arundel on the Bay, where their local community organization collected all the bottles with all the hate literature, took the hate literature out of the bottles and burned it. The group never came back. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's an extremely important issue, and one which that we see resonate still to today.
Right. Well, there's also, I think, a need for a different kind of response to some of the negative incidents. For instance, with the hanging of the noose at the middle school, one of the attorneys for one of the young men responsible and the state's attorney approached the NAACP and said, would you be willing to, after the young man pleads guilty, would you be willing to oversee his community service time? And that made a lot of sense. There was some vigorous debate in the organization. And interestingly, a number of our new members, most recently, are white members. That I think after 2016, people saw some sides to their country that they thought had long since passed away, and have been motivated to say, okay, what can we do about this? Because this is not my country. We're not having this. And so a lot of our white members are like, oh no, absolutely, bring him in. We need to engage him. So rather than saying send him to jail and just let him deal with the punishment for the crime, and he might not have even gone to jail, but then if it's just probation, what's the benefit of that? Or if you go to jail, what's the benefit of that? Because then in jail, everybody's kind of cordoned off into their interest groups. Right. And if you're a white guy in jail, you might end up tracking toward either the Christian group or the supremacist group. And if he comes out after having been with a supremacist group, he's a more dedicated member of that community. So we had an opportunity to come up with something different, and there have been some pretty encouraging results to that. And also there's just a matter of dialogue. One of the biggest lies that has been told in our country, in the world, is the lie of race, that there is a belief that is unscientific. Race is a social concept. It is not a scientific concept. You and I are 99.9% plus the same genetically. But yet, because of this false ideology of race, you have people who are in similar circumstance and condition who are basically kept at loggerheads, butting heads against each other, to the point where the issues that affect them both don't get addressed. And so I actually wrote a book about it entitled Stop Falling for the Okie Doke, how the lie of race continues to undermine our country. And the central thesis of the book is that when we look past this 1/64th of an inch covering, the epidermis, and we look past that less than 1/10 of 1% of our DNA, we will see that we are largely the same. We are all members of the human family, different ethnicities, but the human family. And what do we need to do? What are our common interests and concerns as members of the human family? So changing the dialogue so that we no longer engage in discussion or debate on things that aren't real. In other words, if someone approaches me and says that, Keller is an entirely different race, iteration of creation, why are you even dealing with him? No, this is my cousin. Everybody on the planet, I don't know if you know this, everybody on the planet is 30th to 50th cousins with everyone else on the planet. So this is cousin, okay, cousin Mike, and we'll work out whatever the concern is, but we have to talk about it. That requires dialogue and an open mind. Everybody's not going to get that, but I think a majority of people, a large majority of people, are open to getting it because they know that some of the lies that have been told and the outgrowth of hate incidents, disconnection in community, etc., warrants a different response.
It's rather interesting in terms of outreaching to different individuals. I think one of the more courageous things I saw, and I had to admit I wasn't a proponent of it when he did it, was the late Leonard Blackshear. They had an event down at City Dock to commemorate an anti-slavery anniversary. Yeah. And the National Alliance, that neo-Nazi group, said they were going to show up with demonstrators. Leonard said, well, he said, I'm going to call them up. They got a website and a phone number. I'm going to call them up. I'm going to talk to them. And I remember I told him, I said, I'd stay clear of that organization. I'd say they're bad news. And he said, I'm going to do it. He called him. And after he told him who he was, there was this long hesitation over the phone, but then he had a conversation. The person went on for about 45 minutes, and it was something that you never think of reaching out to someone of that nature. But it's very similar to what the NAACP, I think, did in the case of the noose hanging episode. Here's a young man who I'm sure, I see many of your members said, well, he's totally impossible to reach someone like that. But your organization said, well, we're going to take a chance, and we're going to move in a reconciling direction. Right.
And then a lot of assumptions get made that once you get to know people, it's like, oh, that wasn't true. Yeah. What my thought was, my assumption was about you was completely inaccurate, and that we have found some of our assumptions about him to have been inaccurate. So the opportunity to engage, and people should never be afraid of conversation. Right. But we also have to go in and own our own stuff, so that you can't go in and be condescending. I just use this by way of example, that I think one of the biggest mistakes that people who call themselves or consider themselves politically progressive do is that they act as if everybody who doesn't get them is stupid. How do you expect to appeal to almost half the country if they feel that you think they're stupid? That bridge is closed. That door is closed. So rather than that, we engage in conversation, talk about our common interests and common needs, and build bridges rather than walls. So that's what we try to do. Yeah.
You recently joined the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and I read the op-ed piece which you wrote on that. What are the goals of the Poor People's Campaign, and why have you embraced it?
The goals now are the same as they were 50 years ago when they were getting started, unfortunately. We want everyone to be able to have a living wage. Now, by way of example, everyone's familiar with or many people are familiar with the March on Washington from 1963, excuse me, where Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. One of the goals of that march was for the minimum wage to be increased to $2 an hour. In 2018, that money in 2018 dollars is $16 an hour. What are they asking for over at the State House and around the country? $15 an hour for a living wage. So some of those things have become stagnant as the stock market has skyrocketed and CEO and administrative pay has skyrocketed, yet working people are still struggling. So the Poor People's Campaign looks beyond skin color, beyond neighborhood, beyond zip code, and says, if you are struggling, if you're at risk of poverty. I attended a general meeting the other day in Washington, and they talked about how almost 50% of the country is either impoverished or working poor or a paycheck or two away from being considered poor. Most people would not think that of themselves, but think about what your family economy would be like if you lost a couple paychecks. You went out without a couple paychecks, you'd be having some problems. Mortgage doesn't get paid, rent doesn't get paid, car note doesn't get paid, collection people start calling. Experiences that might be foreign to some people, but they don't realize how close they are to that precipice. Yeah. And so the Poor People's Campaign is designed to help encourage a system of fair compensation for work. You work hard, you need to get paid. Be paid fairly so that you can have a living wage and not work 2 or 3 jobs and still need SNAP benefits and housing subsidies and vouchers and all those kinds of things. That should not be in the richest country on the earth.
I'm sure that many of our viewers want to know how they can get more information about the NAACP here in Anne Arundel County. How can they reach you?
They can reach us at our website, which is www.annearundelcountynaacp.org. They go to the website, they'll see what our schedule is, our meeting schedule, the places we meet, because we rotate the meetings quarterly, but we meet every third Saturday at 10 a.m. And then each quarter we move it to a different quadrant of the county. We also promote our annual fundraiser, the NAACP Freedom Fund Banquet, which is typically around the third Friday of November each year. Then the complaint tab is also there, and the membership tab is there if people want to join to support the organization.
Thank you for viewing our program today, and please join us again on Annapolis Mosaics. If you would like more information about the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, please jot down the information that's on the screen. You can reach us at 410-263-7998 or by email at hrcommission@annapolis.gov, or check out our page at the City of Annapolis website. Go to www.annapolis.gov, click on City Government icon, then Boards and Commissions, and scroll down to the Human Relations Commission page. And always remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We have flown the air like birds and swum the seas like fishes, but have yet to learn the simple act of walking the earth as brothers and sisters." Thank you.